Yes, YouTube, has been a while since I've done a video. Just been busy doing other things, but yeah, I'm going to cover a topic that is kind of like a follow-up from my video of the comparison of dirt jump bike and a BMX. And quite a few people have asked how I set up the jump bike for like the different disciplines. So obviously the main disciplines, the three that I'm going to cover, are street, skate parks and dirt jumps. So I'll run you through the main factors that can be adjusted depending on the parts that you buy and also the angle that you have things set up. Okay, so starting off, I'll start off at the front of the bike. So a big one is bar rise. So the height of the bars can very much play a factor in how the bike feels overall. So generally speaking, what I've found is the higher rise bar, the more twitchy the bike is, and the lower rise, I found it keeps the bike a bit more planted. What I recommend is if you ride bigger jumps, I generally find that the slightly lower rise keeps that bike nice and planted, so you're a bit more stable. Flip side, it does make the front end harder to pull up, so the higher rise bar that you have, the slightly easier that makes the front end to pull up. So if you ride bigger jumps or dirt jumps, the lower rise would be my recommendation. If you ride more street or skate parks, then the higher rise could be a good option, especially if you're doing a lot of bunny hop tricks. That can help just get that initial pop from that higher rise. Another thing is stem length. So I run quite a short stem, being the Chrome Mag, and basically the shorter the stem, the more twitchy that makes the bike. So basically it means the bike's more confined. The longer the stem means the bike's longer, obviously. So it makes the bike a bit more stable. So the longer the bike, the more stable the bike is, which again, like what I said with the bar, a longer stem if you want that to be more stable, so bigger jumps, slopestyle courses, and a shorter stem if you want the bike to be more twitchy. Okay, just confines it in together. So them two can very much be a big factor on how the bike feels overall. Another thing that we've got to consider, I do like the old school method on wrapping the brake hose just around the stem, or the headset I should say. Now you can obviously get hydraulic gyros, cable gyros, and I also add in just like a little cable tie here. It just stops the cable from going too crazy when you do the bar spins. And I've also got the cable set up, so I mostly do my regular bar spin, which is left hand down, so the cable unwinds when I do the left hand down, so it sits nice and tight up until then. So you just got to remember how many times you've done the bar spin, but after a while you get used to it, so I find that that's fine with me. Another thing is your saddle height. So I find, generally speaking, the biggest factor with the saddle height is for certain tricks. So whether you're going for a suicide no-hander, bar spin, anything like that, I find having the seat higher is beneficial because it just gives your knees a little bit more to clamp to. So you can just clamp that seat, it's right there to be clamped. Downside to having a higher seat is, I found for tricks like tail whips and no foot cans, obviously you've got the saddle there, so there's risk of it getting in the way, risk of kicking it. And again, this can be very much down to what you ride. So you'll probably find if you ride smaller stuff, so like skate park or street more, you could get away with having a slightly lower seat. keeping it out the way, smaller tail whips, smaller no-foot cans, whatever trick it is, just keeping it nice and out the way. On the bigger jumps, obviously that's not it's not a factor quite so much, because you've got the more air time. And once you get that technique, having that more air time, it doesn't really affect you too much having that seat higher. But I find having it roughly, when I put my hand around the seat post, my hand just about gets around, so it's about the height of my hand, and I find that's usually about a happy medium for me to still do bar spins and the odd tail whip. So moving down, we're going to be looking at the whereabouts you have the wheel. So this can play a factor in, again, similar to the stem, how long the bike is. So if you've got the wheel in like me, this can mean that the bike's shorter, okay? But something to consider is sometimes the tyre or the wheel gets too close to the frame here. On this particular geometry frame, that's not the case, but I know on some of them, like the old NS Decades, actually, the old bike I used to have, the tyre used to be like really close to the frame. So just something to keep an eye on, depending what frame you ride. So yeah, so the more slammed that you have it, so the further in, the shorter that makes the bike. Again, more ideal for street, more ideal for skate park, or if you want to do, you know, smaller tricks, you want that bike to be more confined. Makes tail whips easier, spinning a little bit easier. And then the opposite, if you want the bike longer, you can bring, you can see you got roughly, there's probably about 10 millimeters where you could bring that wheel back, and obviously that'll make it longer, so I'll make it a little bit more stable. Another thing to consider is the tyres that you run. This can very much depend on, again, the style of riding that you do and the location that you're riding. So if you're riding a lot of street or skate park, you might find that you want a slightly slicker tyre so that you've got that rolling speed. If you're riding predominantly dirt, then generally speaking, you want a tyre with a bit more tread on. What I've found is where I ride a bit of dirt, mainly in the summer, and a bit of skate park, bit of everything basically, that the Continental Race Kings I've found have always been like a good happy medium. So they ride good on every discipline basically. So I do recommend the Continental Race King tyres. Another good thing about these is they've got a strong sidewall. So if you do overspin anything or land a bit heavy sideways, you don't blow the tyre out, and you won't blow that off the rim. So yeah, really tough tyres, and I usually run about 65 psi in both the front and the back. Another factor is the suspension. So this can very much be down to preference on what brand you run, but then obviously you got the air, how much air you run in the suspension. So I usually run mine quite hard. They're at about 150. You know, that can vary depending on what you ride. Where I ride, like I say, a bit of everything, I find that's just a good happy medium. And I do like my suspension to be a little bit harder. I find when it's too soft, it can feel a little bit weird. It can throw me off a little bit. So that's a good happy medium for me. But the biggest factor on how any bike's set up, in my opinion, is the frame that you have. So the overall geometry of the frame. Good thing now is you've got a lot of options with the 26-inch dirt jump frames, where you can have like a small frame, medium and a large. So you can very much gauge what geometry frame you want depending on what you're riding. And again, in a nutshell, like with the bike setup and like the geometry of the frame and everything, the more confined and smaller that you make the bike, so shorter stem, slamming the wheel and having a small frame, this is personally what I have, is the combined frame, nice and short. I find this ideal for tricks, and this is generally speaking if you mainly sort of ride skate park, street, and if you ride predominantly slope style jumps, so bigger jumps or anything like that, and you don't really ride street or skate park or anything, then you could probably get away with a bigger setup as well. So obviously like the larger frame, larger, longer stem, and you can have your wheel brought back a little bit more. This will all make the bike longer, so on the bigger jumps, the longer the bike, the more stable you are in the air. Another factor obviously is just how tall you are in general. This can also play into account. So yeah, generally speaking, if you're taller, you're obviously going to need the larger frame, and then you can set the bike up from around that. Myself, I'm 5'7", and I've found that the small frame, having everything nice and confined, is again that perfect size and that perfect setup for riding all the disciplines. But yeah, it is very much a preference thing on how you set the bike up, but this should give you a better insight on what you can adjust in order to set the bike up longer or shorter depending on the discipline that you're riding and the height that you are as well. Right, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Hope you found it useful. Comment down below if there's anything else you want me to cover in regards to bike setups or anything like that, and I'll see you guys in the next video.